Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's field trip. We're presenting a deck called Rebranding Brand and kind of walking through some of our new thoughts of how brand is evolving and changing in 2025 and the different ways that we'll need to approach marketing to successfully navigate that transition. I'm John Crowley, and I'm excited to walk you through some of this initial thinking and kind of introduce you to some of what we're thinking and doing at Fuse Create today. So, we're all here for a specific reason. As an industry, we've kind of collectively lost faith in the idea of brand. And the talking heads have been saying it for a long time. It's really been gathering a bit of steam over the years. People like Scott Galloway, very respected professor of marketing and brand leader, is on record as recently as a few weeks ago in a podcast with industry legend Rory Sutherland, saying that the era of brand is dead, that building businesses and building brands is no longer done in the same way, that brand isn't playing the same role it's played. Similarly, streetwear legend Bobby Hundreds, who recently took a job at Disney, is saying that brands like Nike, which are historically seen as some of the most brand-led brands out there, are losing to product-focused brands. They're losing to companies that lean more into product functionality and lean less into building a brand narrative. And going back a few years, in 2009, data data-driven marketing expert Augustine Fu referred to brand as ineffective, irrelevant, irritating, and impotent, which is a relatively aggressive way of explaining one's perspective the brand isn't really adding meaningful value. It's not really driving success. And the problem is you can understand where these people are coming from. Now, the image in the background here is from the very lambasted Pepsi ad where Kendall Jenner solved racism by offering a police officer a Pepsi. And while it seems ridiculous, it wasn't that far out of the norm in the 2010s era of brand marketing that leaned really heavily on purpose. We hit a wall with that in the last few years, partially because I think it was taken too far, and also partially because there were some specific changes that weren't really reflected in the way we were thinking about approaching. One of the biggest ones has been the shift in e-commerce. E-commerce has been growing significantly year over year. It's now at about 20, it's projected to be at about 23% of global commerce by 2028. It's a little over 20% now. And 17% of that currently is driven by social commerce. So you're actually seeing a huge shift to how people are purchasing, which environments they're actually shopping in, and where their major influences. The traditional retail environment is really under threat. I mean, in Canada, we've just seen a 355-year-old retail icon go out of business without much of a shock at all. Literally, no one I've spoken to was surprised. What's also interesting is many of the new and more successful retail strategies going out there are as much about marketing and building an experience for customers to come and engage with as they are about sales. Product and price focused brands are really taking more share as well. There are about twice as many people in Canada buying private label brands than there were 5 years ago, and they're growing in market share faster than they are in comparable markets. A great example of this, when you actually look at the perception of quality and good deal, Kirkland is now ranking somewhere in between Unilever and AB InBev. There was a time when the thing that would separate a house brand or a product and price focused brand from something more publicly centered would be that perception of quality, would be that perception of value. But now it's really shifted. And then finally, I think one of the big elements to consider is that the brand purpose era didn't really deliver. This is where I make a very insidery joke about how I call myself a Simon Sinek when it comes to brand purpose. But I do think this idea of starting with why, though they're really evocative and really motivational, it didn't really deliver mind-blowing shareholder value, nor did it change culture positively in a significant way. And as a result, audiences have gotten incredibly skeptical that brands really do have goals or motivations beyond getting the most profit possible. In addition, the changing face of media has really made brand feel a little bit lost. If you look at the traditional brand building creative that people associate with success in this space, none of it really feels at home at an emerging platform like TikTok that's taking so much of people's time and attention. The best performing stuff on these platforms is often kind of the antithesis of the old school brand building work. And attention is really heading to channels where advertising is a little bit less impact. You can see the almost 400 minutes that people are spending on the internet versus about 100 for broadcast TV, a little bit less for streaming, a little bit less for music, it's less for that for engagement. The reason I point this out is so many of these environments are, if not advertising hostile, they're definitely not pro advertising. They don't give you the best possible touch point or platform to tell your story in an immersive and interactive manner. So we need to really reconsider how we're doing this. Part of the challenge we're having here is that we're forgetting where our modern idea of brand came from. There's a tendency to think that brand began with a 30-second spot or began with even sponsoring soap operas. But the first brand that fits the definition of the way we think about it actually emerged in 1876 with the trademarking of Bass Ale in the Triangle. This was in the UK. This was a very long time ago, but this was to serve a really specific purpose. Brand wasn't just about building associations or seeming cool. Brand was about familiarity. It was about trust. It was about recognizability. You'd create a brand and you'd promote that brand so people would know that they could trust the product they were buying. And that really led us to think about the evolution of brand, how we kind of started in 1876 and got all the way to 2025 and what's changed. And you can actually see this is a Google Ngram image kind of showing how much the word brand has shown up in books over the years. You can see a little bit of a dip around 1960. And that's when brand stopped being a word you used in reference to cattle and started being one that you would consider in reference to business. You can actually see from the 1980s till 2020s, brand has really shot up in public consciousness. People are paying a lot more attention to it. And we think that's because brand has had a lot of different jobs in it. So you've got your traditional brand. This is your 1960s brand. This is your supermarket grocery store brand. You're going in to look at a store. You're going through a store to look for specific products. And specific products, you're going to identify them by their branding, by their packaging, by their logos. I always use the example of Robin Hood flour when I'm talking about this, because in my family, we make my grandmother's cookies from my grandmother's recipe that she wrote down on an index card many years ago. And on that index card recipe in my grandmother's handwriting, you can actually see that she wrote Robin Hood flour because that was the specific one she trusted. That's the specific one she believed was the right one to use to get the right consistency and the right flavor. And that was the role brand really played for a lot of people. It was about wayfinding. How do I find what I want in the store? But it was still about trust. It was about how do I know this is the right product to get the right result. From there, we moved into kind of an internet era in the 2000s. This is when e-commerce became more of a tangible thing. This is when everyone was very excited about how this was going to change marketing and retail and commerce forever. And a concept that came up a lot in addition to discussions of kind of the zero moment of truth and the idea of people doing their own research was that of the infinite shelf. The idea that you'd buy online and anything would be available to you, which led to some really specific marketing and branding challenges. Because when people are encountering your brand through a search box or through an endless scroll of options, memory and distinctiveness is really key. You want to make sure you're differentiating yourself from everything else in your category so people are looking for you specifically. But you also want that branded search. You want them to remember the name of your brand and your product, and you want that to be the specific thing they're looking for. You don't want someone shopping for cookies. You want them shopping for Chips Ahoy or Oreos. And that really leads to a different conception of how you tell your brand story and how important some of those details are. From there, we had in the 2010s the emergence of the hyper convenience brand. Now, you see the background image here is an Uber Eats driver. But when you look at how this has come to life, it's not just a singular company. It's kind of a world of on-demand everything, whether it be click and collect groceries, whether it be having food or a meal delivered to your home specifically, or whether it be like a TaskRabbit Instacart universe of I need someone to do this thing for me. Suddenly, the brand that you're paying attention to isn't necessarily the brand of the product or service you're consuming, it's the brand of the person bringing it to you. One of the best examples of this is if you use Instacart or a comparable delivery platform, they often have a toggle that lets you say, replace the product with an equivalent product. I don't care. Just give me something as quickly as possible, which is mind blowing. Very few brands would ever be comfortable accepting this in any other setting. When it comes to these hyper convenience brand settings, people have gotten used to the fact that their product is being commoditized and the brand that people are consuming is the person bringing it to them, whether it be Amazon or Uber or DoorDash or Instacart. We also have the emerging social commerce brand. This is something that has exploded in the 2020s. And this is really about content and relationships. This is either a curated channel, a curated online experience, bringing you an aesthetic and products that match it, or sometimes an individual, an influencer or persona that you feel some kind of connection to, that you feel is really representative of what you believe in, and they're surfacing products, surfacing opportunities that you may think are a good fit for you. Often this is about signals and savvy. This is about either trying to get one over on people who may not have the deep understanding that you and your social influencers of choice may have, or it may be driving home that you actually have specific associations, specific ties to brands or subcultures or emerging ideas that you want to help influence part of how you do your job, do your day-to-day life. Another thing that is emerging right now, and this is incredibly recent, is the AI mediated brand. When people are engaging with large language models, when they're using, for example, the background image here is Perplexity shopping product, they're actually engaging with another system that is helping them make decisions. And this is true if you're asking ChatGPT for recommendations about a purchase, or if you're talking to Siri or Alexa and asking them to recommend or buy a product for you. What's really interesting is here is that the role of brand is shifting from being something to help you find what you want to being something to help you kind of validate that you actually have some autonomy and you're getting the benefits that you want out of these systems. Is this a brand that you trust? Is it a brand you respect? Is it a brand that you think fits with your station in life and your interests? That's going to be really important when you ask for a recommendation from a system and you're determining whether or not it's a good fit for you. And that leads us to some really interesting questions. Questions like, I thought this influencer really lined up with my style, but why would a Walmart Birkin go with Chanel Sunnies? Kind of questioning the authenticity of the alignment between different products that are being surfaced. Or a question like, why does ChatGPT recommend such millennial coded things unless I prompt it like crazy? Claude really delivers a higher end vibe. And as people are engaging with these platforms, they are wondering, where's this bias coming from? Where's it leaning? Is this product doing what I want it to do? Or is it doing what it thinks it's best for itself and its builders and masters? And then this one's from my own personal home. Can someone explain to me why Alexa always buys the expensive stevia, not the organic one in a larger size that's better value? Kind of questioning that moment of why is this brand engaging with me in this way? Why is this tool making the decisions that it's making? And so brand has a few new jobs. One of the big ones is that shift from help me choose to help me judge how you choose. Help me understand that this product, this service, this artificial intelligence is delivering value to me in a way that benefits me rather than satisfying some other cog in the system. That means brand is now a signifier you can choose to help say things to other people, but it's also a signifier of how well you are being understood. You're now using it as a tool to evaluate the decisions of other people and other systems rather than just to evaluate the products themselves. Now, in addition to that, this means that for the first time ever, your brand has a non-human audience to worry about. And that feels like a really big moment to pause and consider that you actually now need to think about how your brand will be consumed, recommended, and engaged with by large language models, by systems that don't think or read or learn like a human or forget things like a human does. And we think that's a big question to consider, even though it's not one we're going to claim we have all the answers to. But what all of this means is that our idea of brand is out of date. It's not 1876 anymore. The framing of brands and branding that led to Bass Ale, which is still in operation, has made us realize that we need to reconsider a lot of things. We need to rethink how we think about brand, how we build brands, and also how we measure brands. Some problems that we need to consider. One of the big ones is we still, as an industry, believe that brand and performance are a binary, that what you're doing is one or the other. And this isn't a new idea, but a lot of performance marketing can either help or hurt your brand, and a lot of brand marketing can either help or hurt your performance. The same asset can do different things in different contexts. Some assets can do both. Some assets, unfortunately, do neither. We need to actually be considering how to frame this in a way that's more actionable for us. The traditional funnel doesn't really make sense for a modern buyer experience. When people can go from a need to a recommendation to a purchase in seconds, we can't really continue to build our entire approach based on this idea of running through, awareness, consideration, decision, and action, or whatever you want to label your layers of the funnel. As an industry, we decided a while ago that we were going to switch to journeys, and that was helpful. But today's customer might go straight to the end of that path. And so we need to think about this in a way that's less linear. We need to consider how to market to people when the funnel doesn't really fit modern buyers. Also, the way we measure doesn't tend to reflect the reality of brand value. We have a tendency to measure brand as though it's completely separate from the actual tactical work we do, and not the sum total of all of the interactions that someone's going to take with the brand or brand. As though we get to decide what counts as brand building and what doesn't when. That's never really been particularly logical. but it's becoming more and more obvious that it's not going to work. So we need new ways of thinking about brand. A couple of things to consider. One of the big ones, that brand is a lot more than brand awareness and brand love. And we have a real tendency to focus on those things as the measures of success in terms of building brand. There's more value in focusing on associations and salience. So associations meaning situational meaning you've built in the mind of customers. What do people think about when they think about your brand? And in terms of salience, it's being considered and being relevant in key contexts. When someone has a need, when someone has a gap, do they think about your brand as a solution to that? Or do they just think about your brand as a thing they happen to be aware of? Brands also need to have contextual clarity. And when we say contextual clarity, what we're referring to is this idea that sometimes it is just about being distinctive and recognizable, but other times it might be about something different. It might be about reliability and quality. It might be about cultural fluency and understanding. It may be about being able to acknowledge that different audiences need you to be different things. But if you haven't actually thought about how your brand is supposed to show up in different contexts and the breadth of context people will engage with your brand in, you're probably not going to succeed in all of those contexts. So you need to consider where you're going to show up, where you need to function, and what roles your brand needs to play from that broad list of jobs we talked about earlier discussing brand evolution. We also need new ways of building brands. And for that discussion, I'm going to hand off to our group strategy director, Jackie Kostick, who is a leader in kind of bringing both brand building and strategy and tactics and creative ideas together in a way that are really going to resonate with them. Take it away, Jackie.
Awesome. Well, the good news is brand is alive. If we don't mind going to the next slide, it's how we get there that is just a little bit different kind of in modern times, because the consumer is experiencing you differently and using you in different ways than they have in the past. But the important thing is that the foundations still have kind of three strong elements at its base. The first of which is kind of getting to know you. People need to know what you stand for and be familiar with what you have to offer to ultimately be that choice, because you pick who you know. Next, like any good relationship, they need to trust you. You have to show up in a way that's consistent and they know what to expect from you, or have a kind of familiar association that is the same over time, so they understand what you add to their life. And third of all, you need people to want you. We have to create desire to kind of make that kind of aspirational affinity that they then convert into a real relationship with you through this kind of deeper want. And when we get to build these kind of foundations, we have a number of tools in our toolbox. The first of which is the most obvious one. It's one we're still using. It's one that hasn't changed. It's advertising. The thing about advertising, though, it is high impact cross-channel collateral that tells the brand story through time-bound windows. You get big message. You can be everywhere from earned to paid and really be kind of in the consumer's face to help shift their perception. But its value is in concentrated bursts of activity. And we touched on how the consumer has changed in the last kind of few decades, where we are no longer just getting them at the TV at a specific time slot. They're available to us all the time. So we need to add some other kind of methods to get their attention, hold it, and create that relationship. And that always on consumer has kind of created this demand for content. If we go to the next one. And this is really kind of an evolution to being always accessible. Kind of this is your brand's 365 engagement effort, where we're behaving more like the consumer does in these kind of content spaces. It occurs primarily on your own channels. A lot of it does happen on social media, but kind of what you do there and how you participate should be informed by your brand DNA and how you react in real time, how are you providing kind of quick hits of value or kind of creative that emphasizes something culturally or what you're trying to achieve. Because if you don't go back to you and what your brand stands for, you can kind of make some mistakes by jumping on the wrong trends. And one of it right now, if anyone's on TikTok or YouTube Shorts, is you've probably seen Labubu. This little blind box monster is everywhere, and just because he's everywhere doesn't mean he has to be kind of promoting your toilet paper, or you're kind of creating a reactive post to this kind of moment in time trend that's already sort of on the way out. By kind of choosing things that make sense for you, say you are a kind of nail polish brand and it is fashion week, perhaps you do have something to say and that makes sense. But going back to your brand values and what you represent is really important. And the internet beyond content has led to kind of another big shift, especially kind of in the world of endorsement. And that is the rise of the influencer and the creator. And this is essentially kind of endorsement being democratized to anyone with a significant and loyal following. It doesn't matter if they have 1,000 or 10 million, as long as they have a community that's tuned in, they can provide qualified word of mouth, because the modern consumer doesn't just kind of trust us for our word anymore, because they're able to kind of re-engage and have us engage back. Having these other people talk about you, what you're used for, what you mean, is kind of social proof of that desirability we talked about earlier. And they can be kind of incredibly valuable for kind of shifting opinions and even driving to sales. Next is experience, because we know this has been around, it's tried and true. Like you might have a whole kind of XM arm within your organization, but with those kind of increasing digital first touch points of a brand, sometimes the first time a lot of consumers are interacting with you is when you show up at their door. We don't have the benefit of kind of surrounding them in a physical space as often as we used to, or have as much control of the environment we're in. This is how we're able to kind of live your brand's unique point of view, from event sponsorship to the pop-up or to sampling, where we're trying to give kind of a memorable and meaningful experience that extends beyond that singular touch point. Is it that QR code that unlocks a special offer for an intro on that product that they get right there, right now? Or is it kind of you're giving them like a playlist out of that concert that they're able to keep as a memory and take offline? I said offline, but we're going to talk more about online as we go into kind of e-commerce. What John already talked about is a pivotal shift for brand, and why it's so important is that you are available and to your consumer at the click of a button any time of day. It doesn't matter if it's 2 a.m. or 2 p.m. Being there and being available for purchase or access makes you the best brand. The most convenient brand is often the one that people are kind of going to go for. It's kind of the success of Temu, which we know doesn't have the greatest product quality, but it's there when you need it, and it's there at your doorstep very, very soon. There are a couple kind of up and rising e-com trends we are going to see a lot more of across the board that I want to talk about a little more deeply as we go to the next slide. The first of which is TikTok Shop, and as kind of it gets more kind of mass penetration across the market, across different verticals, it is becoming a major player. And the thing about it is you can go from discovering a product to that conversion in kind of less than 60 seconds. It's an all-in-one kind of edutainment shopping experience where kind of product discovery is actually driven by hashtags, not necessarily the familiar face. And Rare Beauty is actually a great one for using all the tools the platform has to offer, from its shoppable videos to live shopping, which is really the answer to the shopping channel for a few younger cohorts, and kind of discovering new things based on creators you trust. And the cool thing is you could be just kind of a teenager promoting this product through an affiliate program, or you could be Selena Gomez, who's driving you right to that conversion when showing you how to kind of apply their new line of kind of liquid blush. Gaming is a big one, but we're going to just kind of focus on one, for example, here, and that is kind of Fortnite in and of itself. And if you think about what kind of Fortnite has the capability to be, especially for Gen Z and Gen Alpha, it is the world's busiest mall, concert venue, digital gallery, and kind of collab space for now. There can always be a new player coming up, but as a brand with kind of a product launch or kind of just a general brand piece, you can create kind of your own worlds through virtual islands, custom maps. You can drop limited edition digital, but also physical goods within this space for players to use and show off. And Coca-Cola used it in a new way when they actually launched Byte, which was a real life product that had a presence both in game and in the real world to kind of draw in a younger consumer to the brand. And last of which is subscriptions. And subscriptions have been around a long time, whether it be a newspaper, which maybe you don't have the subscription anymore, but kind of print has been there for decades. And the thing is, the who and what you can get through a subscription has shifted because it used to be primarily goods-based, and a lot of it was print, but that has expanded through everything from groceries to services like Uber, where what they're aiming to deliver is actually more value through this kind of sustained contact with one another, where personalization and customization emerges from the habits you demonstrate through kind of service usage, and they're really able to offer you more, whether it is a special offer, a deal, a discount, give you more points through kind of your kind of sustained contact through the subscription to be the more valuable brand to you, as in like an Uber One versus Lyft. And the people will always play a vital role, but now the people have a bigger voice than ever. So kind of as a brand, community is a key tool, which is really this relationship between you and the consumer, but also the relationship with the consumer and the consumer. It reflects everything you've done from a marketing and advertising experience as a brand, where all those beautiful ads you put out, all your content has now been interpreted, and the people are speaking back and making what they think you are into a reality. And a good brand kind of hones in on their community to really become more of a character here. Your kind of stodgy brand standards voice might not have a place in this world. You might still be kind of a bit more authoritative or knowledgeable, but you have to kind of speak to them in a way that feels natural and be willing to join the discussion. It's a big part of what influenced Old Dutch to bring back these kind of novelty cans that the chips used to be sold in as part of their 70th, because right now they're being sold again on eBay. There's that much love for it, but leaning into what your community loves can really pay dividends. There are a few kind of communities you're probably less familiar with or you've heard a lot about that I want to take a second for us to get to know a little bit better. And the first of which is Twitch. And before you get scared and go, gaming, it's not just gaming, but don't count out gamers because they have a lot to spend. There might even be some in this audience, and we are not ashamed of who we are because it is a common hobby. But Twitch is owned by Amazon, and it's essentially a live streaming platform, and it prioritizes real-time interactivity for more personal and immediate brand connections. What's really cool is the audience actually really responds to ads because it keeps their favorite streamers doing what they do best and providing them content for free, which is really, really awesome. So that's why the live events and branded streams or even engagement tools like drops do provide kind of value to the user of the channel. And Mountain Dew actually leaned into this through kind of their Mountain Dew Raid program, where an AI kind of scrubber found kind of more hobby streamers featuring Mountain Dew organically in their content and wanted to give them the opportunity to essentially be their elite athletes by offering them free sponsorship to be featured on the Mountain Dew channel, which is kind of a bit of a hotspot, very coveted, connecting them with the streamers they admire to actually help maybe turn this hobby into a profession, all because they were kind of natural brand fans. Next is Discord, which is kind of a server-based kind of peer-to-peer chat board type community forum where you're actually kind of supposed to do kind of customer support on another level, but it's a great way for virtual events to get feedback and just have kind of loyal discussion amongst people that's very honest and open. But this kind of direct one-to-one contact can actually pay dividends. For example, Chipotle wanted to get a whole bunch of new employees, so they held a virtual career fair and got 20,000 applications out of that, which was an over 70% lift from previous activity of a similar nature because they went where the people were and actually kind of spoke like they did. And lastly, there's Reddit, which is the front page of the internet where brands can actually really build trust by being more authentic, a little bit more stripped down, a little bit more willing to be honest based on kind of different interest niches, because there is a subreddit for everything. And whether it's AMAs or kind of doing user-generated content or kind of ads that feel very natural to the space, like kind of Photoshop does a lot, because there's a whole kind of Photoshop battle section, you're able to kind of reach a community that's leaning in, looking for advice, and is actively searching while they participate in a community. And last of all is fandom. This is community taken to the next level, the apex of brand loyalty, where these brand advocates provide unparalleled marketing value to you through unsolicited endorsement, whether that is making content for your brand without prompting, hosting meetups, events, get-togethers just because they think you're awesome, or defending you kind of when times are tough. You might need, when you're Pepsi, during that Kendall Jenner period, have someone stand up for you and kind of speak to brand love, you being better than Coca-Cola during that time. Jeep's a great example of fandom. There's the wave, there's getting ducked. But these people really provide kind of a type of testimonial that is a next level of authenticity, but also really relatable and trusted. So wrapping this all together and thinking about the tools that are bringing strong brand foundations together, we will have the worst looking acronym if you were to line this up. Maybe it makes a word, maybe it doesn't, but what we have kind of in our tool belt are advertising, content, influencer, experiences, e-commerce, community, and fandom as kind of key ways to build a brand in current times. I'm just going to pass it off to Rita now as we get into speaking to measurement and making it matter.
Thanks, Jackie. So everybody's favorite part, measurement. Now that we're starting to see more investment back in brand after a few years where overwhelmingly the focus became performance, it's important that we redefine and refine the way that we actually measure and attribute success. When we talk about brand measurement, we're often relying on tools that are a little bit antiquated and that are kind of built for a different time when media moved so much slower, when campaigns ran in bursts, as I'm sure we all remember, and when consumer journeys were a lot more linear. Now, this is a time where the funnel still came up in every presentation, and that is how we measured. But today, brand influence is so fluid, as John and Jackie were alluding to. It shows up everywhere. It shows up across platforms, in conversations, through creators, in search trends, and especially in kind of those subconscious thoughts and decisions that we all make before we make a purchase, whether in store, online, or anywhere else. The problem is, many of our measurement tools haven't actually evolved to keep up with the complexity of that journey and experience and the evolution of brand. So if we want to build modern brands and prove their value, we need modern measurement. So next slide, please. We're going to take a look at a few ways that brand is still being measured today, and then we'll take you through some ways that we think we can maybe refine and augment that approach. So first and foremost, we have quarterly and annual brand tracking. Now, brand tracking is that traditional approach we've all seen before. It gives you a read on awareness, on favorability. But let's be honest, by the time the data actually comes in, the campaign or always on activity or whatever we're measuring has ended or changed. The media mix has likely shifted, and the opportunity to actually adapt in real time and respond in real time is long gone. So in addition to that, these studies are often very expensive, they're slow, and they're way too zoomed out to actually guide in your real-time decisions. You get a high-level report that is very long and interesting in theory, but rarely actionable, as I mentioned. For the world's biggest brands, this still definitely has a place, but it shouldn't be the only thing that we use. And for most organizations, especially those looking to move quickly and looking to make their media dollars go further, this approach is just no longer enough. Next slide, please. Here we have brand lift studies, which we all know and love. It's a common go-to for small, mid-sized campaigns. They're accessible, scalable, but not without their limitations. A couple of things to call out. They only measure impact within that one ecosystem and are not an indicator of brand as a whole. In addition to that, each platform has its own definition of what lift is, different sampling tactics, control logic, different methodologies, making it nearly impossible to actually compare results cross-channel in any type of meaningful way. And to truly measure impact, we need to look beyond that one channel. In addition to that, a lot of questions are maybe a little bit broad. An example you'll see on the right here is something that we saw on Reddit. It's a brand survey asking Canadians which of the following financial service brands they've heard of, listing the top 4 banks in Canada. Now, I'm not sure what actionable results we can necessarily get from that, which is a great example of kind of how high level and how disconnected and cookie cutter a lot of these studies are. You have a few questions to choose from, and there's very little customization. Next, please. There's not too much to say here. The last one is kind of that traditional awareness and consideration survey. This is something we see often, especially with smaller brands when budgets are tight. So really just asking consumers what they think. It's completely fine as an internal gut check, but it's not necessarily something we'd rely on to evaluate brand health or campaign effectiveness. It can feel useful, but it's usually skewed towards people who already like the brand, and that makes it really tough to actually tell if your marketing is working or if it's not. It's kind of that ask some people around the office version of brand measurement, which it gets you a little bit of insight, but it's very informal and pretty disconnected from actual campaign impact. Next, please. To recap, we have traditional brand tracking, which is a very high-level view that makes it absolutely impossible to action on. Then next, we have brand lift studies, which only give us that immediate snapshot on one platform, making it too narrow and, again, too difficult to action on. And lastly, we have talking to customers, which is just a little bit too biased given the audience. Next, please. The reality is most of the time we're measuring brand through a very narrow lens. We're focusing on what's easy to quantify versus actual growth and change. It's also static measurement, often, and often looking back versus looking at what we're doing and giving us a chance to actually optimize or pivot. It doesn't really allow for agility. And brand might not always show up neatly in a dashboard. It definitely shows up in behaviors and decisions, and it shows up in how people talk, what they search, what they choose to purchase, and what they always come back to. And brand also builds over time. It's shaped by touch points, by moments, by emotions. And if we're only measuring short term and looking at that static brand recall once a quarter, we're really missing out how brand is actually working in the real world and the impact that it's having. And that's why, next please, we need to rethink how to measure it. So the first thing is evolving from static to live brand tracking. So instead of annual or quarterly trackers, trying always on brand tracking. So next you'll see one of our partners that we've worked with for a couple of years now, Tracksuit. They're a brand tracking platform that's really built for today's marketing reality. It's fast, it's affordable compared to those annual and quarterly brand trackers. And most importantly, it's always on, so you can measure brand on a monthly basis. It gives a very clear view on how you're performing month over month. Has intuitive dashboards, all that fun stuff. You can look at competitor benchmarks and understand your brand also from a regional perspective versus looking at a national snapshot. We have a client based out of Nashville. It's a nonprofit. It's called Souls for Souls. Great example of how this actually led us to changing our strategy for the following year. We had 2 campaigns lined up. We had an awareness campaign, which was around September, October, leading up to holiday. And then we had a very hard-hitting conversion-based campaign starting in November for the holiday season. Now, during that September, October awareness phase, we saw a 20% lift in awareness, which Great, you would think, right? However, when we went out of market and we went into market with our conversion campaign, we saw that awareness drop right back down. Now, what that taught us is, first of all, we don't want 20% spikes. We want a 2 to 3% growth year over year. So for the following year, we weren't doing pulse campaigns of awareness, of conversion, of consideration. We actually went in with an always on full funnel approach, which ensures that we're in market long enough to actually achieve that 2 to 3% growth. Next, please. Now, we need to stop treating awareness as an endpoint and start actually tracking how brand moves people closer to action over time. So measuring brand across that full journey. Instead of siloing branded performance, try using simple tools like post-campaign surveys, branded search lift, to see how brand activity actually influences that awareness. This really does come from setting up the right measurement and attribution model from the start. We typically don't look at attribution models when thinking about brand. But from this perspective, it's very important because if you set up the right signals from the very beginning, it just gives you a fantastic jumping off point to understand how you're tracking and what's working, what's not, and allows you to pivot in the right time. For the third, we want to look for indicators to prove that brand is top of mind. So focusing on observable behavior and not just recall. Instead of asking people, do you remember that brand, or just measuring those static signals, so awareness, recall, consideration, we want to try monitoring dynamic signals like spikes in branded search, any shifts in social sentiment and conversation, growth in category associations. And the great part is we actually now have the tools to do this in a very simple and cohesive way. And for the last one, we have connecting brand equity to actual real business outcomes and making your brand metrics much more C-suite friendly. So instead of tracking vanity metrics like impressions or likes, and impressions and likes are fine, but they just don't tell the full story. We want to try translating that brand performance into a language that the business can actually understand. So market share, impact, customer lifetime value, long-term ROI projections, and many more. And this will ensure that, now that we're actually putting investment back into brand, this will allow us to keep the investment there because we actually have tangible results and business outcomes that we can tie that investment to. So to wrap it all up on the next slide, we have the first one, we have continued monitoring, going from static to live. We have full journey tracking, so really measuring brands' role end to end from the beginning to the end of that journey. We have actions over opinions, so really tracking behavior and not just recall, tracking those dynamic signals versus the static ones. And lastly, making sure that our metrics are C-suite friendly and are tied to all business outcomes. And I will now pass it back on to Jackie to take us through a case study of how everything comes together.
We did all that learning. Let's see it in action. So if we don't mind going to the next one, you've probably seen this brand before. It's Ricola. You likely know their Yodel. You might even be hearing it right now. If you've had kind of a cough or cold or just kind of some minor throat itch, you might have reached for them in the pharmacy aisle. But in 2023, Ricola US kind of noticed kind of a growth and change in consumer behaviors where kind of the need states had expanded, if we don't mind going to the next one. Their kind of current portfolio helped you when you were really, really sick. I don't want to get off the couch, kind of flu and cold. It helped you when you kind of had that lingering cough or kind of just a mild case of the flu. And it also had products that kind of supported kind of making voice use easier on a day-to-day basis and kind of helping you feel at your best from kind of a mouth health perspective. But they've realized there was also kind of an opportunity in kind of a daily throat care space, if we don't mind clicking to the next one, where there was kind of growth potential within the category based on how people were using other products and kind of more kind of chronic minor throat issue care that people experienced on a day-to-day. There was room for a product that could kind of provide that throat comfort from your ahems, those minor throat irritations, hoarseness, things like that. or us right now. But this product didn't just kind of compete with the lozenge category. It actually competed with water and tea, and based on the delicious flavor profiles, even kind of more kind of some candies than they were used to. And if we go to the next slide, this category was really known for advertising in one way, very problem solution, so much so that if you kind of stripped these ads of their logos, you wouldn't know what product they belong to. It's hard to tell. But over the last few years, Ricola kind of using, if we go to the next slide, using kind of social listening, Vivid Data, Circana, was starting to see kind of new gaps for how to talk about the brand, be a little bit just less about kind of the cure or what it can do for you, and more about kind of how it can support you every day from a more kind of emotional perspective and what kind of having a strong voice or throat could do. It's not just a lozenge. It's the reason you can sing all night at a concert and go to the work the next day. It is kind of that kind of empowerer behind your wedding vows so you don't have an awkward tickle at the wrong time. Or it's the reason you can kind of be a super fan of your local sports team no matter how badly they play and what shouting you may do, because you're able to find kind of recovery there. So when we're thinking back to throat balm as we go to the next slide, we kind of dug into what the research really saw as meaningful, kind of from focus groups, just look for a new way in with those other more kind of emotive factors in mind. So if you don't mind going again to the next one, it was really kind of a synergy of both flavor and taste, this perfect unity of form and function brought to us by, next slide, a liquid honey center and kind of a caramel flavor with a bit of herbaceousness that you know and love from Ricola. And we leaned into the two aspects of this kind of flavor, form, and function, if we don't mind hitting the next two animations, to give you some appetite appeal, into a coat and protect, where we're understanding not only its function of what it does when you have the lozenge and it goes through your throat, it feels nice because of that soothing honey, but also kind of that coat and protecting of your voice against these kind of everyday challenges. And we'll play this spot next.
Introducing an entirely new way to coat and protect your throat. New Ricola Throat Balm has a liquid center with honey wrapped in smooth caramel flavor. Coat your throat against irritations with soothing relief that makes every day go a little more smoothly. New Ricola Throat Balm. Coat your throat.
Ricola. So if we look at kind of how all of the aspects of the brand came together, you can hit it one more time, John. I don't think it's going to disappear on us. We did kind of think about how can we turn this form and function to lead into more ad memorability, but also important brand recall. So you expanded your understanding of Ricola from just cough and cold to everyday wellness. And as you see, we had a kind of 45% link on brand linkage, as well as a great amount of brand memorability. So we weren't getting any kind of misattribution in or out of category. This program actually employed kind of full funnel influencers from mega personalities and celebrities like Harry Mack and Good Mythical Morning, who not only help people understand using voice as a vocation on how to use this product and where it could fit in your day-to-day life, but actually provided a bit of entertainment and storytelling that not only increased brand awareness, but also high levels of purchase intent within the campaign. And the upper right, we're actually kind of seeing a reference of one of our more kind of lower funnel, or traditionally lower funnel kind of influencers who gets you closer to that point of purchase where they were actually kind of in targets, helping people understand where to find the product, both in the impulse and pharmacy section. Beyond that, every kind of influencer had to have good attribution back to kind of point of sale. So we leveraged Micmac, which is kind of a multi-storefront virtual hub where you're able to kind of choose whatever place is easier for you to buy, because that ease is so important. And through the influencer campaign, we yielded more than 26 million engagements. Of course, we needed to kind of reinforce with our key kind of identity markers some more kind of functional work that reminded you what we did and what kind of areas of your life we supported in, which we have in the center. And kind of lastly, focusing in on revamping our e-commerce presence, specifically on Amazon, to help use that platform to our advantage through kind of not only a retooling of the shelf itself to get away from just like that infinite aisle into a store experience, but leaning into things like send me a sample through Alexa, which in the US is quite massive versus the Canadian market right now. Having Alexa actually experience a bit of a hoarse voice and some audio ads, so you could even kind of see our benefit in action. And lastly, having live streams within that platform to educate on the usage, its benefit through that more emotive lens within the Amazon platform itself to actually yield over 1,500 new Ricola purchasers. And we did see kind of tremendous growth here through kind of 55.4% awareness, but also kind of consideration jumped a lot. And ultimately it had kind of a lift in 19.3% of purchases. And altogether, both communities, if we don't mind hitting both in and outside of Ricola, responded to this because we weren't just going problem solution. We were thinking about our brand heritage and DNA and employing the new tools we talked about to create something that really hit. Ultimately leaning Throat Balm to move to the number 2 item in category during this time. And just to kind of quickly summarize everything Ricola used, if we don't mind hitting again, it included advertising with earned. It had content across the channels that made the most sense for its consumer. It was influencers from just kind of famous people being cool, you love them, creating something to aspire to the people who helped inform your shopping list. It drove that first trial because this was a new taste experience, so we had to do that sample. And lastly, it was thinking about kind of e-commerce and being accessible as a key part of a modern brand. Now back to John for a little bit of a recap because we've gone through a lot.
Hello, hello. So let's kind of recap some of the key things that we discussed today. First off, we believe we're moving from an era of singular brands to one of contextual brands. And what we mean by that is your brand needs to be ready to show up in different contexts to play different roles, and that needs to be defined and prepared for at the outset. We believe that Legos may be one of the best examples of a contextual brand because they know how to speak to an audience that is looking for a child's toy, an audience that's looking for Rye Entertainment and Will Arnett doing a gruff Batman voice, an audience that's looking for desk toys, or even an audience that's looking for fine art. This is a brand that knows how to show up, how it needs to show up to fulfill the roles it's being asked to fulfill, rather than having a singular kind of iconic perspective that refuses to shift as the world around it shifts. Number 2, brands are no longer built on just the brand work because everything is brand work. And we think it's actually hugely important to internalize this, that there's no such thing as non-brand shaping work. There's only non-brand building work. And putting things out into the world that doesn't build your brand may be wearing it away. Maybe building, it may be moving you away from kind of that core brand infrastructure that a lot of your marketing strategy is based on. Number 3, we need to reconsider our brand infrastructure for new roles and new audiences. Not just at targeting context, niches, different moments, not just to building brands for those moments, but also to build the tools and the systems that are going to guide those moments and making sure we build brands that support that. Thinking about how you build a brand for an AI era, for large language model interpretation, but also how you build a brand that makes sense in a social commerce setting, that makes sense in a mediated interaction through either a system or a delivery app. Thinking about all of those factors needs to come into play when you're figuring out how your brand is going to deal with the modern reality of commerce. And then number 4, it really did jump out at us that you get what you measure is a long-standing phrase, and it's always been true, but you also very much get how you measure. We have a tendency as an industry to think about brand as something ephemeral and disconnected, specifically because we've been measuring it that way. And if we keep doing that, we're going to continue losing the opportunity to build brand into something that's effective and supportive for the work we do. Now, there's a quote that I love to bring up, and like most Mark Twain quotes, it's slightly out of context and slightly apocryphal. But he sent in a telegram once that reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated. And we hope today's conversation have led you to believe that this commentary doesn't just apply to our good friend Samuel Clemens, but also to brand as a concept. Thank you very much for your time and attention, and we look forward to speaking with you in the future.